Next, we're going to walk through the challenge file. Under the Who Made That Schema Change event notification, there is an o1-challenge.sql file. Now, your challenge is to create an event notification. Name it DDL Watcher EN. EN just stands for event notification. You can name it whatever you want. And it does mention, by the way, it's more than one step. So you have to create any dependent objects needed to create the event notification. When it comes to steps on how to do this, I have included the link for a SQL Server Central article written by Jonathan Cahias, because I personally like that one better than I like the documentation on how to do this. So I'll go ahead and bring that up on the screen, this SQL Server Central article by Jonathan. It's from 2009. It's still as fresh for this as you want. This hasn't really changed since 2009. So there's a lot of details on how to do this in Jonathan's article that you can actually use the documentation in, books online as well. That's fine, but I think Jonathan's article is actually better, so I linked to that. Now, what do we need to do? What we need to do is record all of the activity to the table. Now, it says activity in the SQLChallenge event notification watcher database. It's totally fine. That's where we are recording things to. So the event notification, we want it to put things in the notification watcher database. We're going to be logging activity from the SQLChallenge event notification database. It's totally fine if it picks this up from other databases as well. So we want to log activity from anywhere on our instance. We are testing specific commands. You only need to worry about logging the actions listed in the testing. And note that you don't have to log activity for other types of commands. So only worry about the sample activity. Don't worry about logging every potential thing that someone might be able to do. And notice that you don't have to fully automate receiving the event notifications. Event notifications use Service Broker. You have to set up things for Service Broker. There's queues, there's services, there's all types of stuff. And the event notifications are going to land in a queue, and you can receive those into the table. It's fine for the purpose of this exercise for that. You want code that receives it and gets it into the table, but you don't have to create a SQL job. You don't have to do an activation procedure. You don't have to worry about automating that. If you want to go the extra mile, that's fine. But just for the purposes of this, you want code that you can run to get stuff into that table. You don't have to have it happening automatically. I think there's enough complexity without having that as part of the challenge for everyone. But of course, if you want to get it, if you want to do the whole thing, you totally can. This is the activity that we want to log. Just like in the DDL trigger challenge, you may recognize this as it's the same commands. It's just happening now in SQLChallenge event notifications. So we've got a create table. We've got an alter table add constraint. We're dropping the constraint. We're dropping a column. We're doing a rename. And then we're dropping the table. So these are all rerunnable. I can run this block over and over again. So I don't have to rerun the setup script to test. I can just keep running this block of activity and then checking, hey, is it working at this point? And I don't want to delete that block. I want to actually go ahead and leave it there instead of accidentally deleting it. Similar to the DDL trigger, for the final round, make sure that as a low permission user named Stormy, that still works. Now, this is not as big a gotcha as things are with DDL triggers. For DDL triggers, the gotcha is that DDL triggers are really tightly coupled, and trigger code happens in the context of the transaction of the calling user. Event notifications are different. Event notifications are more loosely coupled. Now, this has some implications. If the event notification stuff isn't making its way into the trigger, the commands are going to keep going. Now, as long as that's okay, that's what you want. But what if you want to force things to be logged or not to run, right? Then you want more of a DDL trigger. The big con, I think, about event notifications are that really just that they use Service Broker. The way that event notifications are designed is on the foundation of Service Broker, and Service Broker has never really taken off for wide use among SQL Server developers and database administrators. So it doesn't tend to be super well documented. Very few people write about it these days. Very few enhancements have happened to it. Some cleanup things have happened over the years, but because its use is really quite niche and limited, you don't see a lot of people talking about it or working with it. So if you run into an edge case, if you run into a problem, There's not a huge amount of places to turn to. So that, I think, is the big con. It's great that these are more loosely coupled, but you are using a technology that is not very widely used in SQL Server. So if you run into issues, it does tend to be tougher to troubleshoot. So that's your final round of testing there. It is, I think, whether or not you plan to use these in production anytime soon, I think it is really good to get used to both of these methods. And it may be that you never decide to use these in production. It may be that in some cases you figure out, oh, for the purposes of this testing, it would be useful if we logged this in our dev environment, just so we can actually see what is the time when this script runs, at what timing are we getting to different places, right? If we have code that doesn't do a lot of logging, sometimes things like this can come in useful to log activity for the purpose of troubleshooting something in dev. And then, hey, if we run into an edge case in a development environment, we're probably just going to rip it out and reinstall it, right? So the risks are a little bit different there too. So I do think that I am pretty hesitant about using event notifications in production, and I'm hesitant about using DDL triggers in production as well, just because they've got a lot of gotchas. But I'm a big fan of these for dev environments and potential uses everywhere as well. Now, you might wonder, hey, if you're not going to use them in production, what would you use for auditing? Well, I would look at shopping around and buying tools made specifically for auditing that may do things that these tools don't. For example, DBAs can turn off both event notifications and DDL triggers. And when I have a high requirement for auditing, a lot of times one of the requirements is we want something that the DBA just can't turn off, right? So there's reasons I might buy an appliance, or in some cases buy a vendor product. By the way, I'm not selling a vendor product for these. But in terms of production logging, I might look at something outside of these for other reasons as well. So I think these are incredibly useful for multiple scenarios across different development environments, as well as potentially production, depending on what your requirements are and what your expertise is, how much time you're willing to put into learning Service Broker if you're going to go the event notification route. But it absolutely is good to know how these things work across the whole span of environments. So next up, we're going to talk through possible sample solution for setting up this event notification.